So I will be using the chart this morning, and I'll read to you. It's not a big deal today, but we'll look at it. Okay, we're in verse 6. However, I can't just start there. I have to begin with verse 1, but I'm not going to explain things all over again. We'll just kind of ease into this because we're going to ease into a war this morning. A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, the moon was under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. So there's the church, and she is clothed with the sunlight of the New Testament, and the moon of the light of the Old Testament was under her feet, and on her head were a crown of 12 stars, the apostles. And she was with child, and she cried out, being in labor and in pain, to give birth. The church is trying to give the Christ to the world. Then another sign appeared in heaven, much more ominous. And heaven, we'll have to look at that word here when we get down to verse 6 and 7 more closely. A sign appeared in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads were 7 diadems. And this dragon is an ominous thing, and we'll get that explained more to us today in the scripture. And his tail swept away 1/3 of the stars of heaven. The tail of this pagan apostate church, being led at least by this dragon, Rome, had false teachers. That's the tail. Swept away 1/3 of the stars of heaven. The stars, those that were bright lights in the church, they were even swept aside and thrown to the earth. 1/3 of them were, at least. And the dragon stood before the woman, the church, who was about to give birth, so that when she gave birth, he might devour her child. And she gave birth to a son, a male child, who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up to God and to his throne. And so the church in this is victorious in that the church gave birth to a son, the male child. The church did this, gave Christ to the world, and then he was ensconced safely in heaven to watch for us and to protect the saints and keep us safe. So the church is victorious. Christ is brought to the people. This Christ would rule with iron. You couldn't compromise. He wouldn't compromise. He wouldn't change. Though terrible pressures would be brought on the church and on his word to change. Wouldn't happen. He would rule with iron. And so then he was caught up to the throne there to protect the saints of God. Now this, going on then from where we were, the woman fled into the wilderness. Just before we get to that, this dragon, I researched that a little bit more. Now, we're going to be dealing with a dragon and a beast. Is there any difference? Well, there would be in the physical realm. I expect we look at beasts in different ways than we do. A dragon is more of a living, moving thing, and a beast is something we might conjure up on our own. I don't, this is a picture that you're each going to draw in your mind, and so I'm just getting you to look at it that way. Now, this dragon, it's used as a symbol of pagan Rome and its religion. That's the dragon. Keep that in mind. And we can, in looking at this, the Rome's military insignias, a cohort. What would a cohort in Rome have as on its flag to go with? It was a red dragon. Yeah, it was a red dragon. And so we look down here in verse 3, there was, behold, a great red dragon. Well, is that plain enough for people who read this in 96 AD? Oh yeah, sure it would be. And for a legion, it was an eagle. This dragon, it was red because it was dangerous. It was a dragon because it was looked at as strong, as was an eagle looked at as strong. And that was Rome. And Rome was a bloody, persecuting power. And that's what Christians had to face. The woman, well, let's see. Let me read just one thing on our chart. If you haven't got it, just listen. The church. This is the very first thing as we go to the bottom of the chart on the left side. The church, pictured as a woman, was persecuted by pagan Rome, represented as a 10-horned dragon. As this dragon attempted to devour the church's increase, symbolized as the male child. And that, as Barbara put it in the chart accurately, goes up through chapter 12, verse 6. And in verse 6 it says, then the woman, having given birth to a son, a male child, who was to rule the world, the woman fled into the wilderness where she had a place prepared by God, so that there she would be nourished for 1,260 days or years prophetically. So the woman had a place prepared by God. Where was that place? Would you like to know where it was? Yes. So would I. It was the wilderness. That's what it says. A place prepared in the wilderness where she fled. It's all prepared. Now, if you're going to go someplace that's obscure, you don't want too much attention, or sometimes none. It was hazardous to your health in this case. Where would you go? You would go to a place, well, you just call it a wilderness. Now, what's a wilderness? Nevadans. Yeah. We have wilderness. Yeah, take a trip on Highway 50, head east. Okay, wilderness. Yeah, okay. And if you get tired of the scenery as you're driving along, be encouraged. You're going to get more of it. Lots more of it. It's wilderness. So where was the church? Then the woman fled into the wilderness. Now there's something about that wilderness, though, that was good, where she had a place prepared by God. So this wilderness was special as far as God was concerned, as far as the church was concerned, and it was prepared so that there, in that place, she would be nourished all the while she was there, which would be a long time. A long time. Now, this wilderness, it was long lasting. When would it begin? Well, in our chart, It tells you that it began in 533. Now, we talked about that, 533, and we talked about that in the upper part of the chart, where Justinian was brought to the point that he, as emperor, declared that the bishop of Rome would now be the Lord of the church. 533. And that was just, as we go to the bottom part of the chart, that's just where things began to get really difficult for the church. The church had, see, this is 500 years, almost 500 years after the church started. So they've had a while to get around the kingdom, in the kingdom, and get to be well known and have various episodes of persecution. And there had been one period that, for instance, that lasted 140 years, where they weren't really bothered. The Christians weren't bothered too much. And now, don't misunderstand me by saying, well, they had it free and easy. No, that's not so. But they could meet, they could evangelize, and they were respected. That's when Justinian thought he was doing the church a favor by saying, well, now this, and Constantine was involved in this too, in the same period of time. The church would be the official religion of the empire. But that didn't last too long. That was about 476. 533. Just a little bit later, the roof fell in. When Justinian thought he was doing the church a favor, he wasn't. What happened to Christianity was that it became paganized. And so that's never a help. Now, we read this first little blurb here on the bottom part of the chart. Let me read the second one. The church was temporarily delivered from persecution when the pagan religion of imperial Rome was changed to a Christianized pagan form. This is from Constantine to Justinian, that era. After which, persecution was resumed. Okay, that brings us to verse 7. Now the woman has fled into the wilderness, and the gloves are off. Christians are having a hard time. And the church would be there for 1,260 years. It would end in 1793. That's add it up, do the math. 1793, when the two witnesses were involved, killed, and left lay for 3.5 years. That's all of this works together for that period of time. So between 533 and 1793, we have this period of obscurity. So we're just starting into it now in verse 7. And there was war in heaven. We read back here in verse 1, a great sign appeared in heaven. Heaven. So, what's your concept of heaven? If you get the wrong concept, it'll lead you the wrong way. Heaven. So, looking through my books to see what had to say what, I came across what Lee Turner had to say, and bless his heart, he came through for me. He gave 8, and then another one, definitions of how heaven was used. Thanks, Lee. Which one? Which one? Well, this one isn't too difficult. There's the cosmos heaven, I'll call it. The word was used was sidereal. That's the way out heaven. There's the political heaven. When someone is high up and he's one of the stars, but whatever kind of politics he has. And there's the religious heaven. The heaven that's used here is simply talking about religious things, spiritual things. Remember, the book of Revelation is a book of pictures. Not, don't go literal. It'll lead you to a misunderstanding. So, when a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, the moon is, well, now women can get on some outlandish, different appearances, but to clothe, you can't clothe yourself with the sun. That wouldn't do, and stand on the moon. So we're getting a picture, all right? But it's a picture. Now look over in verse 7. There was war in heaven. Heaven. Not where we're bound for eternally. That's a place that is not going to be like earth in that there's always wars and rumors of wars. How many wars are going on right now? I don't even know. I don't know. So it's not like that in heaven. When I first looked at this a long time ago, that always troubled me, and it had until finally I sat down this time and said to myself, self, you got to figure this out, because you've got a wrong idea here. There was war in heaven. Now, this would be where angels would be. Well, they can operate. I'm going to suggest for you 2 places that this could be a war. In your soul. In you. And in context, in the church. There had been trouble here. And in this context, there's the tail that swept away 1/3 of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. And the dragon, he's trying to do the church in, completely do away with her. But she did give birth to a son, a male child, who's to rule the nations. And now she's fled to the wilderness. So Michael, at the direction of God, obviously, Michael's the good angel. Michael and his angels attacked Satan and his angels, the devil and his angels. So there's war in heaven, Michael and his angels waging war with the dragon. The dragon and his angels waged war. And the dragon was not strong enough, and there was no longer a place found for them in heaven. So there's a conflict between the church and pagan Rome, represented by war. For the souls of people, for the life of the church, pagan Rome would destroy the individual's Christianity, but also the church collective. So there was war, represented by war. Now, Michael and his angels versus Satan and his angels, or pagan Rome. So now, in this war, the dragon, his angels, weren't strong enough. And so there was no longer a place found for them where the church was, where God's people were. The church had to go to the wilderness, but there was a place there prepared for the church. There was a place there that the church was sustained for all that time, 1,260 years. That's in our little finite world that we have. We can't imagine something that lasted that long. We get a building that's 100 years old, like, whoa. We're talking over 1,000 years that this went on. So this conflict represented in a picture of Rome here, Michael and his angels waging war, and they overcame the devil, and they made it so that the devil could not defeat the church. Now, sometimes a guy has to define terms. Defeat. You can lose a battle, but not the war. So the church lost a battle. It went into the wilderness, but it wasn't losing the war. The war was won. So the church was to continue successfully in an obscure way in the wilderness. So the devil was not strong enough, and he was thrown down. That's verse 8. And because there was no longer a place found for them in this heaven that we've mentioned. Okay, let's see. I had other notes here about this. Okay, Satan was defeated. How was Satan defeated? What really caused him to be defeated? We see, it says Michael and his angels fought against the devil and his angels, and he defeated them. They weren't strong enough. But what's the manifestation? What can we actually, as people, see what caused this? What was the outcome? You look in verse 11, and you see what happened that caused this. And though I know I'm kind of skipping down here, but it just fits. And they overcame, that is, the Christians overcame him, the devil, because of three things. The blood of the Lamb, first and foremost. It was the blood of the Lamb that was there that defeated Satan, and because of the word of their testimony. They would testify and testify, and they kept it up. All the time that they had been getting persecuted, they still kept testifying. God is good. God has saved me. God has helped me. I've got the blood of Jesus Christ washed away my sins. And they kept testifying. I don't know all that they testified, but read the Bible. All this that's there, they were testifying to this. So because of the word of their testimony, and one more thing, do you get it there? They did not love their own life, even when faced with death. You couldn't scare them with death. You couldn't cause them to dethrone Christ in their life and in the church by threatening them with death. You couldn't get them to say, I recant, because of death. That you just couldn't affect them. So these three things, the blood of the Lamb, their testimony, and their refusal to be frightened by death, was the visible manifestation of Satan's defeat. Michael and his angels fought. And that's our picture in a war, a spiritual war, where the prize was the souls of men, the soul of the church. And they simply would not give in to that. So in verse 7, the war in heaven, Michael and his angels waged war with the dragon. The dragon and his angels waged war. They fought back, and they were not strong enough, and there was no longer a place found for them in heaven, and the great dragon was thrown down. Who is this we're talking about, this dragon? Now, we mentioned dragons and beasts, and we'll get the next chapter, we'll get into beasts quite a bit. But right now, a dragon. Who is this dragon? Exactly. Who is he? Well, the rest of verse 9. The serpent of old Wasn't there a serpent of old somewhere, way back somewhere? Where was it? Yeah, serpent in the garden. Right. In the back of our bulletin this morning, I think there's a little blurb about that. And God looking for Adam and Eve, and they who had always had such fellowship with God, apparently in the garden and just visiting with God comfortably, suddenly they're hiding. Well, the serpent had been there. So the great dragon was thrown down, the serpent of old, who is called the devil and Satan. Now, in my Bible, this New American Standard updated, if something is divine, it's capitalized. I mentioned this before. It's capitalized. So that really helps me with pronouns. Him, his, they, them, all of this. Who are we talking about? Especially if it goes on for a whole paragraph and we just mention it at the first and leave it alone. This really helps me. But I came down to devil and Satan. Devil is not capitalized, Satan is. And why? Well, I have a live-in English professor, Mrs. Spoke. And I ran this thought by her, and she concurred, and so it's all right. I can say this. When we get down here to the devil, that is, where are we? Verse 9. Okay. Who is called the devil. That's just what he is. So it's not capitalized. It's just what he is. And then we get to Satan. And though that Satan is, as it's used there, is not divine, oh boy, he's not. Still, it's a proper name. So in English, proper names are given capital letter. But it kind of grates me when I capitalize anything that has to do with Satan or the devil. But still, proper English says you do it this way. All right, so I do. Sometimes. So in verse 9, the great dragon, who is he? He's the serpent of old. He's called the devil and Satan. And if you look up those words, see what they are. Oh my, he is just bad news. And he goes on to describe it. Who deceives the whole world. World, I have a footnote, inhabited earth. Now, that, believe it or not, restricts it a little bit from everybody, but in searching out this being that we're discussing here, you can understand it, whole earth, everybody. There isn't anyone who is exempt from this. And about him, he was thrown down to the earth. And his angels were thrown down with him. There's a big study to study about angels, good and bad, their abode, their purpose, what happened to the bad ones especially, and all of this. In some part, what happened to them is what happened to us. We disobeyed. And there's a good lesson there. And what will happen to them will happen to us if we're disobedient. So we don't want to go there. We do not want to go there. So now we're down to the end of this. They were thrown down. Let's see. The angels were thrown down with him, with the devil, Satan. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come. Now, boy, we got a lot of things going on here. For the accuser of our brethren's been thrown down. The church is in the wilderness. The church is in obscurity. The church is you might think it's hanging on by a thread. But the accuser of our brethren's been thrown down. He accuses them before our God day and night. And I might add, boy, is he ticked off. He just lost the battle of battles. In a real sense, he'd lost it before. Well, he never had won. Talk about something that's difficult to get through to. You can tell people something, and you can tell them lots of times. And if you don't believe that's true, teach a school. And finally, the light comes on. But with Satan, it just never came on. He kept fighting back and back and back. But here again, he's lost. And he's been thrown down. We looked in verse 9 where this great dragon was described and who he was, and so on and so on. Now, we get in verse 10, the end of verse 10, we get a little more description of him, of his job description. He who accuses them, the brethren, the church, us, who accuses them before our God day and night. That has been, I'll say that has been stopped, but hear this, that has been stopped. He still accuses, but it isn't successful. There's a difference between being accused and you know you stand guilty as could be, and being accused and you know you didn't do it. There's a world of difference. Well, that's the difference. He is the accuser of the brethren. Jesus Christ and his blood stood in the gap, and the verse that we just read, all of that's there, and now, yeah, he accuses, but we are innocent because of Christ's blood, because of Christ. So all of this is going on here in this 12th chapter, and we get down to he accuses them, the Christians, before our God day and night, and they overcame him because of the blood of the Lamb. See, we'll get down to that part now. This is how we overcome, or how they overcame in those days. And because of the word of their testimony, and they did not love their life even when faced with death. For this reason, verse 12, rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. You who are spiritual, you who are in the church. Woe to the earth and the sea, on the other hand, because the devil has come down to you. And like I said, boy, is he upset. He's come down to you having great wrath, knowing that he has only a short time. The last couple of years I kind of quit watching football because NFL made me upset. I love my country. I wish they did too. Some do, I know. Some don't, I know. In a football game, they go along, they have so many seconds between plays, they have this and they have that, they have timeouts, and they have a whole bunch of stuff. They can take the last 2 minutes of a football game, and it'll last a good 20 minutes, maybe half an hour. Depends. And that doesn't even hold a candle to basketball. The end of basketball, that's half the game. But anyway, they go along and they kind of and then a 2-minute warning, and then they get down to business. Boy, they get down to, I mean, they're only behind, 2 touchdowns, but they can make that up. We got 2 minutes, and we got this guy that's our quarterback. Okay. right here, the devil has come down to you having great wrath, knowing that the 2-minute warning has sounded. He has a short time. I give it 2 minutes, but he doesn't know how much time. He just knows it's short. When Christ was on earth and he accosted some of the demons that, for instance, were going to inhabit some pigs, they knew the time was short, and they said so. And they were some of these that had been cast down. Now, having great wrath, knowing that he had a short time. Let's see. Okay. So there are some other things that the devil then is listed here that he's going to try and do. And when the dragon saw that he was thrown down to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. Persecution time was really on now. There had been this little time where Constantine and Justinian had made things just a little bit better for a little while, about 140 years, I mentioned, and now that's over. Short time. The devil is really going to get with the program. He saw that he was thrown down to earth. He persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. But the 2 wings of the great eagle were given to the woman, the church, so that she could fly into the wilderness to her place. Now, the wilderness, that's, remember, I said, and it told us that wilderness was a place prepared where the church, the woman, would be nourished for this length of time. It was for the 1,260 days or years. So now she has this wings of an eagle. Fly to the wilderness, to her place, where she was nourished for how long? Same length of time. Don't let it throw you. A time, that's a year, and times, that's plural, that's 2 years. Now we have 3 years. And a half a time. It's 3.5 years. If you figure it out, it's 1,260 days, or 1,300 or 260 years. And so she could fly to the wilderness, to her place where she was nourished for this long from the presence of the serpent. The church would be protected for that length of time. In her obscurity, in her dealings, in the things she had to do to exist, she would survive because she was being cared for. All right, and the serpent. What would he do to reach her? Well, there's one stuff on earth that has more power than we give it credit for, but we use it. And that's water. Our lights are on in part in some areas because of water. Build a dam, use the power of the water to turn a turbine, generate electricity, all kinds of ways. Get out in this little creek out here, the Truckee River. And there are times of the year you walk out in that Truckee River and down the river you go. You can't stop yourself. It's that powerful. So what did the devil do? He used a flood. And the serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth after the woman, so that he might cause her to be swept away with the flood. But the earth's on God's side, the church's side. The earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and drank up the river which the dragon poured out of his mouth. It was a matter of the dragon poured this out. This is false teaching. This is that would wash the church away with false teaching, like the tail that they talked about before that took a third of the stars of the church out. This flood, I'm out of time. I can't get it all out, so I'm not going to go any further. But Lord willing, we'll see you folks next Lord's Day. We'll finish this chapter and get well into the next one, who talks about a dragon and a beast. Thank you again so much.